Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is going to share with us her experience her journey as from an abusive childhood and how she's gotten to where she is today. So, guest, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Judy Foreman. I am a journalist. I've been a journalist at the Boston Globe and a health columnist for many years, and now I'm writing books. I've just written my fifth, which I think we will talk about.
Yes.
I'm happy to talk about it. So
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm so happy for you to be there. Be here. So tell us a bit about kind of where you started with your journey from the childhood, just a bit about, what kind of things did you go through and then we'll move into where you are now and how you're helping other people with what you do now.
Sure. So I grew up in a middle-class house. It didn't look like an abusive house we think would look like, although the message I've learned from all this is that you can't tell from the outside what's going on the inside. My father was a very successful businessman. He was a vice president of a company, one of the U.S. major corporations. You would all know it, I'm positive. He was a very Trumpian character, very narcissistic, verbally abusive, angry all the time, bossy. Nobody mattered except him. And my mother was, I think she was sort of spunky when she was growing up. She was kind of like the son her father always wanted, but she was emotionally totally not there for me. And I'll get into my father's abuse, but thinking back, in some ways, the neglect and the sort of phobia about feelings that I got from my mother has been more difficult to deal with. The absence of love, real deep love and communication from her has been really hard. So in terms of my father, he would come when I was a teenager. He would come into my bedroom every night. I could hear his footsteps coming down the hall. I would freeze. If I thought he was far enough away, I would turn my light off and pretend that I was already asleep. He would open the door, and he was wearing only a t-shirt, so everything else was hanging out, and it terrified me because every night I thought I was going to get raped. And it was like, I don't know if you've heard the term mock execution, but sometimes terrorists have a hostage and they pretend, like in front of the guy's wife, to shoot him. They don't actually shoot him, but the terror induced by this threat is huge. So that was what it was like for me. It was like a mock execution. Was he going to rape me that night or the next night? He was also an alcoholic and I think very depressed. He would sit at the dinner table and tell us how wonderful we were as a family, but in total tears. And everybody was afraid of him. We walked around on eggshells around him all the time. So I grew up terrified of him and afraid to go to sleep. I had insomnia because I did not want to be surprised. What if he came into my room? What if he got on top of me? What if I couldn't breathe? What if he actually raped me? So there was a lot of anxiety. But I didn't know it. I mean, when you're in that situation, what you're in is normal as a child. All you know is the emotional world that you're in. If someone had asked me as a teenager, "Are you being abused at home?" I would say, "What do you mean? I mean, no one's hitting me." So it's just surprising how you just assume that what you're experiencing is normal, and it's not. In my case, it wasn't until I was an exchange student for a summer with a Danish family that I lived with them, and they were happy. Nobody got drunk. Nobody was abusive. They laughed at the dinner table instead of cowered. There was no fear. I mean, it was so weird. And it was sort of the beginning of opening my eyes to what I was really living with, that not everyone came home to an angry father. not everyone tiptoed around their father. Some people actually felt close to their mothers, could trust their mothers. So there was a lot of learning after I sort of got out. I was really lucky in that I went to a women's college. I went to Wellesley,
Hmm.
and it was the first time that I feel like I had value as a woman, or actually, in spite of being a woman. Um, I was not expected to do anything or be anything, and this was the old days. But it was really nice to have my thoughts matter, my work matter, my studies matter for what I was producing, and I wasn't a guy. So that was very enlightening. And then let's see, I married my college sweetheart, and we went in the Peace Corps in Brazil, which was great. We had a son there who is also great. Um, but once we got back, we were really too immature to be married, actually. So we we got divorced, but it was very amicable. Um, and the what happened during that sort of breaking up process was I became very good friends with one of his former college roommates, who helped me get a job at a small newspaper near Boston called the Lowell Sun. And so I became a journalist, and I loved it right away. It was me. I'm very extroverted, and I got to talk to people. And I had done well in college because I was a writer. I loved writing papers and stuff. So journalism was a fabulous stumble into a good thing. And I feel lucky because, yeah, it was perfect for me. And a lot of people don't have a perfect fit with their work. And work takes up so much of your life and is so important for your sense of meaning and well-being and self-esteem and all that, that was all great for me. Even more important, and if there's a take-home message for everybody listening, this I think would be it, was journalism was really a search for the truth. And after not being able to even realize the truth in my family of what was going on, to be able to go out and get the truth and figure it out and figure out what was true, what wasn't true, to have it on the front page, I could tell the truth. I was paid to tell the truth.
Yeah,
um, and paid to tell the truth, speaking truth to power. Um, so it was a great career, and I feel very lucky to have discovered journalism. So
fantastic.
that's sort of where we are.
So tell me a bit. I know I shared with you before we started recording that I also had a yucky childhood, including a mother that sounds much like yours, very detached, definitely not an emotional person. I don't remember her ever telling me she loved me, for example,
Right.
in all my years. And so I personally struggled with when I was a parent. So how did that affect you at all when you had your own child, to say, I don't have a role model. I don't know what it's like to be a loving, caring, hugging, whatever mother to my child. I had to kind of think about it. And in my case, I still am not comfortable with a lot of hugging and so on. So I have to consciously in my mind say, did you tell that kid that you love them? Did you give them a hug before they leave? I have to remind myself because it doesn't come
Mm.
naturally to me. So I'm just curious if that was anything like your experience as
That
a parent.
that was not my experience exactly, but perhaps because my father actually, the name of the chapter that I talked about, was he never touched me because he didn't. The threat was always there. So the anxiety and the fear and everything was always there. But no, in fact, I've had very, very huggy relationships with. On my third marriage, my first husband and I got divorced. My second husband died of prostate cancer about 17 years ago, and now I'm with my third husband. And I do have a message on that when we get to that. But no, they've all been very physically healthy and warm, very cuddly relationships. And I remember I nursed my son, and I loved that. That was just wonderful. Emotionally, I think I tried to get to his feelings and ask about his feelings. Even doing kind of like a type of play therapy, like we had a dog named Teddy Bear, and I would say, how's Teddy Bear feeling? Well, Teddy Bear's a little sad. Why is Teddy Bear sad? And trying to elicit his feelings, because my mother was so the opposite. She could not do feelings. And that's been very hard for me to deal with because it makes me scared of my own feelings. It has made me scared of my own feelings,
Yeah.
which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
Extremely common, as I'm sure you know,
really?
for people who
Yeah,
survive things like, especially with you made the comment about neglect being a form of abuse, and I completely agree
yeah.
with that, and know that, yeah, that is, it's a hard thing to go through.
It wasn't neglect like, I was clothed and
Right. No,
fed and
no,
all
yeah,
that, but
emotional kind of, yeah,
emotional, yes. I think she couldn't tolerate her own feelings.
probably, probably.
There's a legacy part of all this.
Yeah, it's probably that, what do they call it now? Generational trauma, is that kind of thing. Is
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it's become, yeah.
But one thing I would like to say to everybody listening, I'm on my third marriage and I had a lot of therapy. I'm a very pro therapy message here, but as I've gotten healthier and healthier psychologically, I've picked better men more and more capable of intimacy, which is interesting, I think. I'm my husband and I now have just a very close, intimate relationship. We share everything and we're very supportive of each other. And we do fight sometimes. I don't want to make it seem like it's not real. But the degree of intimacy we have now, I could not have had when I was 18 years old with my first husband. I mean, it's taken a lot of therapy to be able to do that after what I grew up with.
Yeah, it's
So I
vulnerable.
think that's a
Yeah.
positive message.
Yeah, it's definitely vulnerable. I know in my case,
Yeah,
I grew up with what I call my need to know thing. I would only tell people what they needed to know rather than share the full spectrum of things, including how I was feeling, because I was always worried that that would be used against me. So that,
yeah,
yeah, with therapy, again, I'm pro therapy too. Had to learn that, part of an intimate relationship is being able to share things, even things you're scared to share. And that I didn't get
right.
to my third marriage either. So you and I have that in common as well. I just, yeah, it was really kind of a thing that had to evolve over time. So tell me
Yeah,
about your writing and your 5 books. I know a bit about them, but tell our listeners, kind of what your books are about, what your audience is, kind of why you were inspired to write.
sure. Um, I was a feature writer at the Boston Globe for a while, and then I became a science writer, which was great. Um, so the first two books are about chronic pain. The hardback, which is my first book, is called A Nation in Pain. And I love that book because it talks about there's like 100 million Americans who live in chronic pain. Not all of them are disabled by it, but it's a significant fact for a lot of people. And people, especially women, are often dismissed. Their women's pain is really dismissed, even though in a lot of ways they have more of it. And it makes me crazy that this whole focus, we've had a huge focus on the opioid epidemic, which is horrible, and people die. But also horrible is chronic pain, and we pay no attention to that. And chronic pain patients in the last, I don't know, 10 or so years since the war on opioids, a lot of chronic pain patients need opioids, do not abuse them, and would be suicidal without them. And they're having a very hard time getting them. So I am very sympathetic to them because the government, the CDC, had for a while had very strict standards for who could prescribe opioids. A lot of doctors left the field. They were scared to treat patients with that medication. And obviously, that's not the only way to treat pain, but for
Right.
people who need it and benefit from it, it can be life-saving. And all the attention, despite my efforts, and there were a lot of them, have been on the abuse of opioids rather than getting opioids to people who really need them. So that
Yeah.
was the first two books. Um, and then the third one is kind of a favorite. It's called Exercise is Medicine. And it goes into it's very readable. I reread it at times myself. But it goes into a lot of the scientific reasons why exercise is so good for you, especially for your brain. Um, when you exercise, your brain actually pumps out a chemical called, we don't want to know, BDNF, brain derived neurotrophic factor. But just think of it as miracle grow for the brain. It really makes neurons grow, makes nerve cells grow. And that has a good effect on thinking, on cognition, and a good effect on mood. And the data is huge. There are mountains of data on that. Then I wrote a novel called CRISPR'd, CRISPR''D, which was a medical thriller. And it's based on this new thing. People may have heard of CRISPR. It's a gene editing technique that is very powerful. And people really know the term a lot by now. It has the potential to cure a lot of genetic diseases, but it can also be used malevolently. So I invented an evil geneticist, and he gets outed by a young reporter for the Boston Globe, much like myself, who wins a Pulitzer for discovering what he was doing to babies, which was bad. And then my fifth book is this memoir, Let the More Loving One Be Me. And that is now on Amazon as of a couple of weeks ago. And it is a memoir, which, so all three different types of writing. But the memoir is obviously very personal, and people have told me they've read it in one sitting. That, I didn't think my life was that thrilling, but people have told me they can't put it down.
Yeah,
So
I've actually heard that about my book too. My book isn't very long, but yeah, it's just people want to know how did it end. It's like,
yeah, really.
I'm still here. Your mystery one reminds me of that movie Gattaca, and I'm sure you've probably seen that, where it's all, everybody's like, they take out all of the unfavorable things, like you don't need glasses and so on, and all that, and so having a natural baby is bad, and stuff like that. So my first thing I thought of when you were telling me about your book is that movie.
Yeah.
And that whole thought process of, are we going to go there, or what
Right. It raises
have,
a lot of questions.
are we all going to have blonde hair and blue eyes, or what's
Right,
considered the
exactly.
most favorable? I mean, personally, I'd love to see us get rid of cancers and heart disease and all these
Yes.
ugly things. That would be fantastic. But I think your book might be a little more accurate than that. I think there'd be bad people using it for their own gain. So yeah.
Yes.
Tell me a bit about, I know you do some advocacy for helping child abuse survivors. So what does that entail, and kind of, is that part of your writing for the Globe, or what are you doing?
Oh, well, I don't actually do advocacy for child abuse survivors. I've written about it.
Right.
And in my book, I have, my book has a lot of sort of factual stuff, like each chapter, like after the chapter about abuse, I have a lot of statistics on how common sexual abuse of children and adolescents is. But I don't, I'm not in a group of, I'm not trying to be a therapist or anything like that. I mean, my work is basically as a journalist.
Yeah. Even writing that part about
Oh, I mean, if you're interested, I have some of these statistics. If you're not, that's fine.
It's unfortunately it is far too common. So I'm curious to know if you are, if we had a listener for this episode that was has come out of, some traumatic things as a child, whether it's, emotional neglect or whatever it might be, and they're struggling, and like in your earlier relationships when you were really young, and you were, the whole not being know what emotional intimacy was all about. What advice would you give? What road would you say to start down? Anything along those lines?
I am a big advocate of psychotherapy. I've had many different kinds, and the one I have been using the most in recent years is, in my mind, by far the best. I've tried the cognitive behavioral approach and just regular talking therapy. And the thing that's really important, I think, is to really look inside. I mean, a lot of people are scared to, including me. I think it takes an awful lot of courage to really face the truth of one's own past and one's own feelings. And it can take ages to try to uncover those feelings. And the therapy that I would recommend most to people is called internal family systems therapy. I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but it's increasingly popular. I mean, it's not that different from regular psychotherapy. But you learn to, like, if you get very angry, you sort of learn to separate a little bit from the angry, not sort of be in it, but sort of look at it very sympathetically with a lot of compassion. Like, so why am I angry? What's going on? But with a gentle heart, kind of, and say, yeah, I'm really hurt. He did this to me, and he just walked out of the room while I was talking or something. That's not good. That's not right. and you sort of pay attention to the feelings, but with a certain amount of inner wisdom or Buddhism or something. And that's incredibly helpful. It's a hard kind of therapy to describe because it sounds so jargony, but it's very helpful especially when you look at what they call your exiled parts, the parts you've repressed in more Freudian terms, the parts you don't want to go to, the parts you can't quite remember, but they're there and they influence your behavior and they influence your feelings and your mood and your mental health. And the more you delve into them and help them heal, they can heal, the better you are and the better you feel. So I am a huge advocate of that. And also, a lot of people get some benefit from journaling, and talking to friends and learning who to trust and not to trust. And for people like me who also grew up in an alcoholic family, for years I went to adult children of alcoholics, which is incredibly helpful. You see patterns that you wouldn't see. You think, oh yeah, I fit that pattern. That's
Yeah.
really true. That really happened. And that's very validating.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, internal family therapy systems. Is that what you said?
No, internal family systems
Oh, systems. Okay.
therapy.
Got it.
IFS.
Okay, gotcha. And when you say family, does that can a person individual seek out that type of
It's
therapy?
actually, the idea is like you have different parts of your family incorporated into yourself. Like my sort of anxious, punitive part is often my mother, has often come from my mother. Maybe the angry part comes from my father. So it's not quite that linear or rigid, but
Right.
I think there's a website either for internal family systems, or maybe it's called the Center for Self Leadership. I mean, the idea is you have sort of a centered self, and we all kind of know when we're in a centered spot and when we're kind of, over revved or riled up in an excessive way. I'm not doing a great sales job, but it's a very
No,
helpful there.
no.
And it's especially helpful in couples therapy because you can sort of realize, oh, he's mad at me, but he's not really, that's not coming from his centered place. He's just pissed off, or,
Yeah, yeah,
um, so it can be very helpful for that.
yeah. No, it's great. I will do some research on it when we're done talking today because I'm fascinated by it. I've never heard of it. So,
Yeah.
is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our episode? Anything that comes to mind that you want to share with listeners?
Just that the search for your own emotional truth is very difficult, but totally worth it. Absolutely, totally worth it. I mean, for all the work I've done in my jobs, those are a piece of cake. I could do that with one arm type. The hard work is figuring out yourself, but that's where it's at.
Yeah,
That's totally where it's at.
yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
I've enjoyed it myself. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'm looking forward to researching this IFS and checking out your books. So, yes.
Thank you. Oh yeah, let me give. It's called. Oh, you can't see it. Let the More Loving One Be Me by Judy Foreman, and it's Foreman, by the way, in case people don't know, is Foreman. So people, if you spell it wrong, you won't find it on Amazon. But if you
Uh,
spell it right, you will.
well, we'll get links when we post your episodes.
Yeah.
Links so
Okay.
listeners can
Great.
find you a whole lot easier than having to just go out on a blind search. So we make it easy.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Good luck
Thank
to you
you.
too.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other online book retailers.